In this video, we'll be discussing nested loops, but first I want to review basic loops first. So let me write down a question, and the question says, or asks, can you create a simple loop that counts from 1 to 3 and prints each number? So, of course, in this case, we want to use a for loop that starts at the value of 1 and will go until the value of 3, because we want to count from 1 to 3, and we want to increment by 1 each time. So the console in this case will print out loop number I. So we're going to run this, and it prints loop number 1, 2, and 3. And this occurs because we're starting at a value of 1, and 1 is less than or equal to 3, so this condition is satisfied, so the console will print out loop number 1. And then we will increment up to 2 because we want to increment by 1 each time. And the condition is still satisfied with 2, so loop number 2 is printed. So then we will increment to 3. 3 still satisfies this condition, so we print out loop number 3, increment up by 1 to 4, and 4 does not satisfy this condition, so the loop stops. So now let's try a nested loop. So for this, I'm going to write down the requirements so we fully understand what we want to do. So I'm going to remove this. And let's go through this example. So for this example, we want to use two for loops, one inside the other. We want to create an outer loop that runs from 1 to 3. We want to create an inner loop that runs from 1 to 2. And then we want to print both loop counters each time. So to start off, we're going to start off with the outer loop, which controls how many times the inner loop runs. So we're going to say let I start at a value of 1 and go until a value of 3, and we're going to increment by 1 each time. Then we're going to create the inner loop, which runs completely before each outer loop cycle. So we are going to start at a value of 1 for that, and we're going to say j is less than or equal to 2, so we want to go until a value of 2 and increment by 1 each time. So let's write our print statement, and we'll say outer loop, and we're going to put I, put a space there. We're going to separate the outer loop from the inner loop, and we're going to put a j right here, and let's run this, and it gives us our output. And this output occurs, as you can see, it's 1 1 1 2 2 1 2 2 3 1 3 2, and this occurs because the inner loop runs completely for each outer loop cycle. So we start at a value of 1 here, and we will not go until the next value, so we will not go until 2 until 1 and 2 are printed out for the inner loop. So that's why we have 2 1s here, and it prints out 1 2, and then 2 2 1 2 3 3 1 2. So for each iteration here, it waits until every possible iteration has been completed for the inner loop. So that is how this works, this nested loop. So let's try another example that works in a very similar way. So let me get rid of this, and all I want to do here is write the question, because we do understand how this works now. So let's create a for loop in this case, and we want to print all pairs of numbers from 1 to 3 using nested loops. So what that means is we want both loops to run from 1 to 3, and we want to print out every possible pair of ij combinations. So let's start at a value of 1 and go until a value of 3 and increment by 1 each time, and we're going to create another for loop, an inner one, that where j equals a value of 1, starts at a value of 1, and j is less than or equal to 3, meaning it goes till a value of 3 and increments by 1 each time. And then the console will print pair I. We're going to have a comma in between them, and then we are going to put j here. Okay, so let's run this, and it has printed all possible pairs. So this works in the exact same way as the previous question, but instead of having a limit of 2 within the inner loop like we did for the last question, we have just changed this to a value of 3. So it prints each pair. So of course, each iteration here is completed before the outer loop makes its first iteration, and so on until it goes to the value of 3. So that's why it has 1, 1 initially, because we started a value of 1, started a value of 1, and then this iterates once. So we move on to a value of 2 here, so it prints 1, 2. This stays the same. 1, 3 is printed because this iterates again, and then since we have reached the highest value here, this will then finally get a chance to increment by 1 value to 2, and then it will do the same thing all over again for the inner loop, and then it will move to 3, do the exact same thing again. So that is how this works. Essentially the exact same thing as the previous question. So let's go through a more difficult example here. So I'm going to write the actual question here in addition to the requirements. So for this, we want to build a multiplication table from 1 to 3 using nested loops. So I'm going to write down the requirements here. So for this question, we of course want to use 2 nested for loops. Both loops should run from 1 to 3 because we want it to be a 3 by 3 table. We're going to multiply the outer and inner loop numbers together, and we want to display the results as, for example, 1 times 1 or 3 times 3 for the very last print statement we'll have. And then we want to add a separator for each row. So let's try this. So we're going to create a for loop that starts at the value of 1 and goes until the value of 3 and increments by a value of 1 each time. We're then going to create an inner loop that actually handles the multiplication part. So we're going to start at a value of 1 for that case, and then we are going to go until a value of 3 and increment by 1 each time. We are then going to print the outer loop value times the inner loop value. And this right here, what I'm doing is just normal string concatenation. So it's just taking the value that we're going to have times the other value. So this is not actually doing any multiplication. It's just representing it like 1 times 1, like I put up there. And then the actual multiplication will be completed within here. And then what we want to do below is we want to separate each row, console.log, and we're just going to write a few dashes there. And let's run this. And it has printed out perfectly. So this is essentially the same thing as the previous 2 questions as well, but now we're actually using a mathematical operator within the console. And what's essentially happening here is we're starting with the value of 1, and then the inner loop will iterate until the value of 3. The outer loop will then increment to the value of 2 after that once this has gone through 1, 2, and 3, and it will do the same thing for values 2 and 3 after. So that is how this question works. It's a little bit more difficult, but it essentially works in the exact same way as the previous examples I've gone through. So let's go through one more example, and this is a little bit more difficult even than the multiplication question that we've just done. So I'm going to write down the question and the requirements for this as well. So let me do that quick. So what we want to do for this is we want to use nested loops to draw a 4x4 grid made of hashtag symbols. So we want to create an outer loop that creates 4 rows, inner loop creates 4 columns, and we want to use hashtag for each column. And then each row should print a new line. So if you believe you can solve this on your own, give this a try, and I'll solve it for everyone else after you're able to solve this. So please pause the video if you think you're able to do that. Okay, so now I will try to solve this and show you how it works. So we're going to create a for loop that starts at the value of 1 and increments until the value of 4 and increments by 1 each time. So then what I want to do is I want to create an empty string which represents an empty row. So we want to start with an empty row. And then I'm going to create the inner loop that starts at a value of 1, goes until a value of 4, and increments by 1 each time. And then we want to add 1 symbol per column, so we want to represent that by the plus equals operator, and we are going to put a hashtag there. So when this runs each time, a hashtag will be printed out. So let's console.log this row, and this will print out the entire row. So as you can see, it is printed out of 4x4. This 4 represents that there are 4 more of the same elements, so that just means this is printed out of 4x4. So that is how we do nested loops in JavaScript. So if you've learned something new, please like and subscribe. And if you want to go through more examples like this, these are excellent examples to go through. Really helps your fundamental understanding of loops and how the code actually works. So I'll create more videos like this one very soon, but please like and subscribe in the meantime, and I'll see you for the next video. Thank you.